the story you were told is not the story that the evidence tells. From the very beginning, the public was presented with a simple, closed case: a shot was fired at a crowded event, a suspect was swiftly apprehended, and justice was being served. The man in custody, Tyler Robinson, was portrayed not as an alleged perpetrator but as the definitive culprit. His face was splashed across news channels, a symbol of a threat neutralized. But what happens when the foundation of that swift justice begins to crack? What emerges when the physical evidence, the witness testimonies, and the digital trail all point not toward the man in handcuffs, but away from him? This is an investigation into the unsettling gaps between the official narrative and a growing body of contradictions, a mystery that suggests the full truth of what happened that day remains hidden in plain sight. To follow this developing story, be sure to subscribe. The most profound challenge to any criminal case is often the silent, unshakable testimony of physical evidence. In the case against Tyler Robinson, that challenge came in the form of a single bullet. When a firearm is discharged, it leaves unique marks on the cartridge casing and the bullet itself, a ballistic fingerprint that can definitively link around to a specific weapon. This is not speculative science, it is a cornerstone of forensic investigation. According to standard procedure, the bullet recovered from the scene of the incident was sent for analysis. The results were unequivocal: the markings, the caliber, and the ballistic signature did not match the rifle that was publicly linked to Tyler Robinson. This was not a minor discrepancy or a debatable technicality. The round came from an entirely different class of firearm. In any typical investigation, this finding would trigger an immediate and profound reassessment. It would force detectives to question their assumptions, widen their suspect pool, and consider the possibility that they had apprehended the wrong individual. The mismatch should have been a turning point, a moment where the pursuit of truth overrode the desire for a quick resolution. But in this instance, the turning point never came. Instead of halting the proceedings, the investigation into Tyler Robinson continued unabated. The ballistic report, which should have been a central piece of exculpatory evidence for the defense, was effectively buried. The forensic experts who conducted the initial analysis were quietly reassigned, their findings overshadowed by the relentless forward momentum of the prosecution's case. When Robinson's public defender raised the obvious question, if the bullet doesn't match his client's weapon, why is he still being held? The response was not a clarification but a retreat into procedural secrecy. The data was locked away, ostensibly to protect the integrity of the investigation. This creates a deeply troubling paradox. How can the integrity of an investigation be protected by ignoring the very evidence that defines what actually happened? The insistence on proceeding with a case that is fundamentally at odds with its own physical proof suggests that other forces are at work. It implies that the narrative of Robinson's guilt had become more important than the facts supporting it. This prioritization of narrative over evidence erodes public trust in the entire justice system. It transforms a legal process into a theatrical performance, where the outcome is predetermined, and inconvenient facts are treated as backstage distractions to be hidden from the audience. The bullet that doesn't fit is more than a forensic anomaly, it is a key that could unlock the true story, a story that someone seems determined to keep locked away. In the chaotic moments following a traumatic public event, the accounts of those who were there can provide a fragmented but crucial mosaic of the truth. At the event where Charlie Kirk was speaking, several attendees came forward with clear, consistent, and yet deeply troubling statements for the official story. 3 separate spectators, with no apparent connection to one another, independently reported that the sound of the shot did not come from ground level, where Tyler Robinson was supposedly positioned. They described it as originating from an elevated position, from above the crowd. One witness was so certain that he repeatedly emphasized this point to the first responders, stating clearly, it came from higher up. Another individual reported seeing furtive movement on a rooftop overlooking the venue just seconds after the noise echoed through the area, a single figure retreating from view. Perhaps most startling was an account from a bystander who insisted on hearing 2 distinct firing sources, not an echo or an auditory illusion, but 2 separate sounds that suggested more than one weapon was involved. These were not anonymous online posts, these were formal, on-the-record statements given to law enforcement officials. In a thorough and unbiased investigation, such consistent accounts from multiple sources would be considered gold. They would prompt a sweep of the rooftops, a review of any elevated access points, and a re-evaluation of the security footprint. Instead, these witness statements seem to have been systematically sidelined. Some were marked in internal documents as inconsistent, despite their correlation with each other. Others were allegedly misfiled or redacted before any comprehensive review could take place. The effect was not an expansion of the investigative scope, but a deliberate narrowing. By dismissing these accounts, the investigation effectively turned a blind eye to an entire dimension of the event. The problem is not that witnesses were confused, the problem appears to be that what they saw and heard was inconvenient. It contradicted the simple, ground-level narrative that had already been constructed around Tyler Robinson. When people who are trying to help find the truth have their observations suppressed or dismissed, it creates a chilling effect. It signals that the goal is not to compile all available information, but to curate only the information that fits a pre-approved storyline. The ignored witnesses become ghosts in the machine of justice, their voice is a persistent reminder that the official record is incomplete, and that the full picture of what happened that day is still waiting to be seen and heard. The planning for a high-profile public event is a complex ballet of risk assessment and security protocol. For a figure like Charlie Kirk, standard precautions would typically include a multi-layered security envelope, sniffer dogs, magnetometers, ground-level patrols, and critically, surveillance of elevated vantage points. Rooftop spotters, aerial drone monitoring, and secured access to all buildings overlooking the venue are not extravagant measures, they are modern necessities for mitigating threat. Yet, on the day in question, a startling number of these standard protocols were absent. Despite being surrounded by buildings with clear sightlines, there were no security personnel stationed on the rooftops. There were no drones in the air to provide a live, overhead feed of the crowd and its periphery. This absence of elevated surveillance created a critical blind spot, a void in the observational field that, in hindsight, seems like a profound vulnerability. This gap becomes even more significant when considered alongside the witness accounts that pointed to an elevated origin for the shot. The official version places the sole suspect in a location that was easily accessible and highly visible to ground-level security, a position almost too convenient. Meanwhile, the areas above, the rooftops and upper-floor windows, were left completely unmonitored. This failure to implement basic, high-level oversight is difficult to reconcile with the purported level of threat assessment. Was it a catastrophic lapse in planning, a simple failure of protocol? Or did it reflect a conscious decision to allocate resources away from certain areas? The consequence, intentional or not, was that a significant portion of the event's landscape remained unwatched. This allowed for the possibility of activity occurring out of sight of the main security apparatus. Furthermore, the physical evidence found on Tyler Robinson himself added to the mystery. The gunshot residue tests conducted on him did not show the pattern or concentration that would be expected from someone who had just discharged a firearm. The traces were faint and inconsistent, raising questions about his proximity to the actual event. When you combine the lack of rooftop surveillance with the conflicting witness statements and the ambiguous residue findings, the security preparation itself becomes a central character in the mystery. It paints a picture of an event that was, in key aspects, left exposed, creating a perfect environment for confusion, for alternative narratives to flourish, and for the true sequence of events to become obscured before the investigation even began. In our digitally connected age, a person's movements can often be traced with remarkable precision. The timeline constructed by authorities placed Tyler Robinson at a specific location, near the speaker's platform, at the exact moment the shot was fired. This positioning was central to the narrative of his guilt. However, this official timeline is starkly contradicted by two separate streams of data, digital evidence from his mobile phone and the accounts of multiple witnesses. According to data pulled from his cell phone, his device pinged off a cell tower that serviced a part of the venue far removed from the alleged firing point. This electronic breadcrumb trail suggests he was physically distant from the epicenter of the incident when it occurred. This digital alibi is corroborated by several attendees who independently recall seeing Robinson minutes before the chaos erupted. They place him on the opposite side of the crowd, calmly walking, not maneuvering into a position for an attack. He was described as being in a location that would have made it nearly impossible for him to be where the prosecution claims he was, given the time constraints and the density of the crowd. In any investigation concerned with establishing factual truth, this combination of digital and human testimony would be paramount. It would demand a rigorous recreation of events and a humble admission that the initial assessment might have been flawed. But then, another layer of mystery was added. The surveillance cameras that covered the section of the venue where witnesses placed Robinson, the area that could have visually confirmed or denied his alibi, suffered a curious failure. The footage from those specific cameras, and only those cameras, went dark. It wasn't a system-wide crash, it was a targeted gap in the record, a silence that aligns perfectly with the crucial window of the incident. The convergence of these three elements, the phone data, the consistent witness accounts, and the conveniently missing footage, creates a powerful counter-narrative. It suggests that Tyler Robinson was not where the official story claims he was. A timeline is the backbone of any criminal case. If it is broken, the entire case should collapse. The fact that it hasn't, despite these significant contradictions, points to an investigation that is either unwilling or unable to follow the evidence where it logically leads, even when that evidence points away from its only suspect. The strategies employed by a legal defense team can reveal volumes about the hidden pressures and unspoken realities of a case. Initially, Tyler Robinson's court-appointed defender pursued the most logical path. They challenged the arrest, demanded the disclosure of evidence, and prepared to attack the prosecution's case based on its most obvious weakness, the mismatched ballistics. This is the standard playbook for asserting a client's innocence. However, as the pretrial process unfolded, a noticeable and puzzling shift occurred. The defense's focus began to drift away from challenging the core facts of the accusation. Instead of aggressively highlighting the lack of physical evidence, the legal strategy pivoted toward themes of mental capacity, personal history, and mitigation. The arguments became less about he didn't do it and more about understanding the circumstances that might have led him to be there. This is a profound and telling transition. When a defense team stops fighting the fundamental premise of the charges and starts maneuvering for a more lenient sentence or a plea deal, it often indicates that they are navigating forces beyond the courtroom. It suggests that the path to proving innocence has been effectively blocked, not by a lack of evidence, but by systemic or procedural barriers. Were the defense attorneys presented with a deal, a reduced charge in exchange for their silence on the case's inconsistencies? Or were they implicitly warned that pushing too hard on the ballistic evidence or the witness discrepancies would have consequences, potentially exposing their client to even greater risk? This shift from a fact-based defense to a psychological one is a form of containment. It effectively contains the narrative within the framework of Robinson's guilt, merely haggling over the degree of his responsibility. It stops the uncomfortable questions from being shouted in open court. When a lawyer ceases to fight the facts, it is rarely because the facts are on their side, it is often because the system surrounding the facts has become hostile to the truth. This legal pivot is not an admission of guilt from the defendant, it is a sobering reflection of a process where the goal has shifted from discovering what happened to managing the fallout. Behind the public facade of any major investigation, there is always an undercurrent of information shared in hushed tones and off-the-record conversations. In the case of Tyler Robinson, these whispers from insiders paint a picture starkly different from the official press releases. Sources close to the investigation, including a federal contact, have hinted that Robinson was never intended to be the long-term focus. He was described, chillingly, as a placeholder, a person to hold public attention and demonstrate progress while other, less visible aspects of the case were handled. Another source revealed that his name was circulated among law enforcement agencies as the primary suspect before the ballistic review was even completed. This sequence is critical, it suggests the conclusion was reached before the key evidence was fully analyzed. Even more revealing are reports that 2 officers involved in the initial stages of the investigation are bound by non-disclosure agreements. For rank-and-file law enforcement, such confidentiality measures are highly unusual in a standard criminal case. NDAs are tools of control, used to manage information and prevent leaks. Their presence here implies that the details of this case are considered sensitive not for reasons of operational security, but perhaps for reasons of narrative control. These insider accounts, while anonymous, form a consistent pattern. They point to a process that was rushed, predetermined, and tightly managed from the very beginning. The placeholder theory explains the reluctance to change course when evidence emerged that should have exonerated Robinson. To admit he was the wrong man would be to admit that the initial, swift judgment was an error and that the real perpetrator remained at large. The whispers from the inside suggest that for the authorities, maintaining the appearance of a solved case was a higher priority than confronting the more complex and embarrassing reality of an unsolved one. In the chaotic minutes after the shooting, as alarms blared and people ran in every direction, something strange happened that didn't make it into the official story. While everyone was quickly told that a man named Tyler Robinson was the lone shooter, several people who were there tell a different story. Members of the security team remember a second man. They saw him not running away in panic, but moving calmly, almost like he knew exactly where he was going. They stopped him, took him into a small side room, and questioned him. But here's the strange part, they never wrote his name down. They never took his picture. They didn't fill out a single form. After a short, intense conversation, they just let him go. It was as if he was never there. A woman named Maria, who was selling coffee from a cart near a staff exit, saw him, too. She told a police officer that she saw a man matching that description walk calmly out a restricted door just after the chaos started. He didn't look scared. He looked focused, like he was following a plan. The officer wrote down what Maria said, but that report has also disappeared. No one can find it. The fact that this second man was ever there is a huge deal. It means the police and security knew, right from the start, that there might have been two people involved. But the public was only ever told about one, Tyler Robinson. This makes you wonder, why was Tyler chosen to take the fall? What was it about him that made him the right guy to blame? And what was it about the other man that made them let him walk away without a trace? This mystery man is the ghost of this whole tragedy, a clue that was found and then thrown away. We all know that feeling after something terrible happens. We are scared, we are hurt, and we desperately need to feel safe again. We need to know that the bad guy has been caught and that it's all over. The police and the government feel that pressure, too. Announcing Tyler Robinson's arrest gave everyone that sense of relief. It was a signal that the system was working and that we could all start to move on. But that need for a quick ending can sometimes get in the way of the truth. The story of one lone, troubled gunman is simple. It's easy to understand. It gives us a villain and a clear ending. But the real story, the one with a second suspect, with missing evidence, with security failures, is messy, complicated, and scary. It makes us question the very people who are supposed to protect us. It seems that in this case, giving people a simple answer was more important than finding the real answer. For those in charge, admitting they might have the wrong man would have caused a huge scandal. It would have meant telling a terrified public that the real shooter might still be out there. It would have meant admitting a massive mistake. Keeping the simple story, even if it was wrong, felt safer and easier than dealing with the messy truth. But that's a betrayal of what justice is supposed to be. Justice is supposed to be about what really happened, not what's easiest for everyone to believe. Today, if you look it up, the case is officially solved. The file is closed. But that's just a word on a folder. In reality, the case hasn't been solved, it's been hidden. Any piece of evidence that could prove Tyler isn't the shooter has been locked away. The people who saw what really happened have been ignored. The story has been fixed in place, even though parts of it don't make sense. This isn't justice, it's just management. They are managing the problem until people forget. The reason for this cover-up is simple: as long as everyone believes Tyler Robinson is guilty, no one is looking for anyone else. The search for the truth stopped the moment they decided he was the culprit. Every new clue that points away from him is treated not as a lead, but as a problem to be buried. The case remains hidden because the truth would be too embarrassing and too damaging for the people in power. It would show that their security failed, that their investigation was a mess, and that they lied to the public. So, the real mystery is no longer about what Tyler did. The real mystery is, who is he protecting? Who is the real shooter, and why are the authorities so determined to keep him in the shadows? The story we've been told about that day is like a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces don't fit. The details about the bullet, the witness stories, the security camera footage, none of it adds up to the simple picture we were sold. Tyler Robinson is the one in jail, but it feels more and more like he's just a stand-in, taking the blame for a story that hasn't been told. This isn't about wild conspiracy theories. It's about common sense. When so many things about an official story don't line up, you shouldn't ignore your doubts. You should listen to them. Finding the truth isn't always clean or easy. It doesn't always give us the quick comfort we want. But it's the only thing that can ever lead to real justice. This case is still an open wound for our community, not just because of the violence that started it, but because of the lies and the silence that have followed. The case isn't closed. It's just waiting for someone to care enough to reopen it. For more balanced reporting and careful analysis like this, consider subscribing.